Hi, and welcome back. I'm Mike Quincy.
I'm Ryan Pizlikowski.
And I'm Jennifer Stockberger.
So on today's episode of Talking Cars, it's a very special episode in that we get to answer your questions for the entire time. We love getting your questions. Text 30-second videos. Send them all to TalkingCars@iCloud.com. That's TalkingCars@iCloud.com. And we're going to get right into it, starting with, leading off is Connor, who writes. That's a baseball thing. Connor writes, I just started listening to your podcast and I'm really enjoying it. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what it will be like to own a gas-powered vehicle once EV ownership surpasses internal combustion engine ownership. Will there be range anxiety due to disappearing gas stations? Will filling up with gas be extremely affordable? So this almost to me sounds like a sequel to Mad Max, which is maybe a little bit extremist, but
that's Waterworld.
Yeah, I mean,
a mixing of my crazy movies. Yes.
Yes, the podcast is called Talking Movies. So let me throw this out to you guys. Do you see a scenario in the near or even distant future where we are out of petroleum?
Well, first of all, I think it'll be a while. Till we see that, like decades before we are even close to that. And this question made me think of other things that were the norm that now are the exception. And it's little things. It could be, I think we said VHS tapes, turntables, landlines. I thought of charcoal grills.
Right.
And I thought, where new technology, be it gas grills or cell phones or whatever, surpassed what was at one time the norm. The answer is, as long as enough people still have them, we will accommodate them in our infrastructure. I think of the station you'll pull into. It may be a bunch of EV chargers in a row, but over here somewhere will be a gas pump and maybe even a diesel pump. And diesel pumps are another. You go to a gas station, they'll have 20 gas pumps, but they'll have one diesel,
right?
Mainly for pickup trucks. We don't have a lot of diesel cars in the U.S., but it's there. And I think when he says, will gas be extremely affordable? I actually think the opposite will be true. It'll now be the exception. Gas will be more expensive.
Right.
Not only because it will be the exception, but they'll want to continue. If indeed EVs prove to be the benefit to the environment, they'll want to push the ICE, internal combustion cars, further and further out. And they will become the classics. And I think of the way we sometimes return to the classics. Charcoal now is way better than a gas-fired steak.
No, exactly.
All those things. I have a turntable. You have a turntable? You have vinyl with a turntable?
I used to, but in terms of like a landline, some of the work I do here at Consumer Reports is media work, and I'm doing radio interviews,
right?
And a landline has better clarity than a wireless phone.
Yep.
Right.
And so it is this situation where what's old is new again, that old expression that your parents might have said to you, is certainly from the case. But one of the things, Ryan, and I'm interested in your thoughts about this, is Connor's question says, once EV ownership surpasses internal combustion ownership.
Yeah, that's where I have a hard time with it, I guess. And I think, to Jen's point, it's going to be a long time, decades. I don't think the battery technology is where it needs to be for people to be comfortable to completely shift over to that, away from internal combustion engines. So I like to think I won't see this in my lifetime, but I'm a gearhead, so I still like my internal combustions every now and again. I do think it should start to dwindle, I guess, or you'll see less of it and more electric stuff, more chargers. It's going to take a long time, I think. And I hope gasoline cars don't fully go away.
Right. And in terms of internal combustion, or we're also, you can bring in the argument about biodiesel, because that was kind of a thing for a while.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be a need for us, even if it's a specialty thing, for an internal combustion engine somewhere. And they're going to learn, and they're going to figure out ways to make fuels differently and do things. Technology is going to spread. I think it's not just going to be battery powered cars. I think there's going to spread. I think we're going to see other things. And some technologies come out of nowhere to help facilitate
different
that.
refining, different
Sure,
emissions
yeah.
controls that can
Right.
make it work
Right.
Yeah.
for the needs, like Ryan says, where it's necessary.
And
So I think you'll see an integration, not an elimination.
Right. And I was
Sure.
onto that thought of integration. In the short run, we're seeing the migration to hybrids and plug-in hybrids.
Correct.
For people who are a little reluctant to get into a pure electric vehicle.
Yep.
And here at Consumer Reports, we're certainly doing a big push, buying a number of these plug-in
Yeah.
models, which we'll be reporting on in the near future as well. But it is an interesting question. There's a lot going on here, whether or not the market is going to decide. Is
Yeah.
the government going to influence, or is it fully the automakers are going to gamble? They're going to bet. They're going to say we're all going to go this way, and maybe they're right or maybe they're not, and everything. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But I like your guys' answers, because I'm not ready to give up internal combustion either. so hopefully in our lifetime we won't have that issue, but we'll see what happens to our children's future. Yeah. But that being said, let's move on to our next question, which is Alan from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. We have a Tesla Model 3 rear-wheel drive, which we love, but one issue I've noticed is that the tires seem to wear out about twice as fast as you would expect to see, given the rated wear life. We are not aggressive drivers and are about to get our third set of tires on the car, despite having driven it less than 60,000 miles. Does Consumer Reports have any special tests for EV tires, given the range and rolling resistance consideration? Well, Alan, your lucky day, because it's just a wicked coincidence. Can you imagine? Ryan Pislakowski is here, our resident tire expert, one of our resident tire experts, and to talk about what EV drivers should consider going forward.
Sure. To answer his question right off the bat, we don't do anything special right at the moment. I think the fact of the matter is EVs, the EV vehicles, they have 4 tires on them, just like internal combustion engine car. The tires still have the same responsibilities. They need to carry a load, they need to handle, they need to grip the surface. It's all the same stuff. EVs are heavier. In some cases, 10, 20, 30% heavier than what would be maybe their equivalent counterpart or competitor, right? As an internal combustion car. And they're heavier, they have more torque, that wears tires out. Unfortunately, that's out of your hands. I mean, you can drive a little bit more carefully to not wear these tires out faster, but they're going to wear out faster no matter what. You're not going to get around it. The way these cars are today, they're heavy. The batteries are heavy, and then all the safety stuff that's in them and the size of these vehicles, they wear out tires. This is a real thing. We were watching it. Lots of complaints and concerns coming through, and it's just part of this new world of EVs. So. Going forward, we will be testing replacement EV tires. There's not a ton of them out there yet, but we will be venturing down that road. And rolling resistance we currently do on all tires, and simply just measuring the force required for the tire to roll around the road. So a tire with low rolling resistance is more fuel efficient or energy efficient. So we do that now. We will do that. Certainly do that with the EV tires. Right. That's going to be a big thing, because that pretty much tells you right there, how much range you might lose or gain on your EV. So it is coming, and it's lagging a little behind with the replacement market, because that's always a bit behind the OE tires that come on your EV from the factory. So yeah.
OE meaning original equipment.
Original equipment.
And you go to tire symposiums and conferences,
Mm-hmm.
you have your finger on the pulse of the tire industry. I'm assuming that the tire industry is working on this, planning on this, coming up with a whole line of specific tires. Now, do you think that these tires are going to be more expensive on average to replace on an EV compared to, a mainstream model?
Yeah, as of right now, they are certainly. And a lot of that's due to the size. Because if you look in our parking lot, we have quite a few EVs. They all have these big 20-inch wheels, low profile sidewalls, and they don't make a ton of these tires. So the demands, supply and demand, they're just expensive. the technology is going to make them more expensive as well. If they're putting, they're trying to make them low rolling resistant, but they need to make them wear, and they have to still grip snow. There's a tire's a compromise, so you're pulling from all these different areas, trying to make the tire do everything perfectly, and it just can't. So the more technology you put in it, the more expensive it gets.
It's going to be a trade-off of range versus this wear and performance thing, because like Ryan says, even you take a more mainstream, a Bolt or Ioniq 5 or something, they got a ton of torque.
Yeah, right.
If you didn't have all of that grip, you'd be spinning tires all day long as you take off all that instant power. So it's going to be a balance for sure, and it's going to take some time for the models to come in.
Yeah.
And again, it's something that EV owners need to be aware of. I think Jeff Bartlett, one of our editors, said he had a friend with a Model 3. He was on set 3 with like 42,000 miles. So he was right where Alan is.
What Alan's saying is just strikingly similar to everything I've heard in the past now.
And that the replacement tires, depending on how you go, if you don't go with a very dedicated EV, what will that do to your range? And I do think we will look at that.
We are going to. We will.
Well, it's just a little background.
Right.
Jen Stockberg came to Consumer Reports after working at Pirelli Tire. So definitely is still well versed in tires. And one more follow-up question to you, Ryan. When you mentioned that most of our EVs here at the track have like these 20-inch tires. Now, do you think, is that more because of styling or function?
So a lot of it's function. You have to carry the load. So these vehicles are heavy, and you want to narrow not so much taller, but a narrower tire. But you still need the volume of air to hold the vehicle up off the ground. So they're making these wider, squattier tires, and they also need to grip the road because they're heavier.
Right.
So there's this trade-off, this awkward trade-off of like, ideally, a good low rolling resistance tire is a lightweight, a thin carcass tire that has narrow tire. I mean, think of a road bike tire. Okay, your road bike tire, high pressure, very very narrow.
Yeah.
Right. But you're only hauling yourself down the road, so it's a different application. So that's kind of why we're seeing that. All these, and tires like that tend to wear out faster as well anyway.
Because they have a performance edge to
them.
For sure.
Exactly.
Well, we can go round and round on tires, but we have to move on to the next question.
And Alan
here
is not alone, for sure.
Okay, next up is Steve, who writes, over the years, I've thought about how simple it would be for manufacturers to add a simple safety feature, a light out indicator for the driver to know if a taillight, running light, or headlight is not working. From my experience, most cars do not show that a bulb or LED needs replacing. What have you all heard in the industry about this, given that more expensive blind spot warning, lane keep assist, and other more advanced safety features do have these alerts? So this was a great question, Steve, and we all spent some time digging into it, but I'm going to start with Jen. And what do you have for Steve?
So, Steve, you are preaching to my personal choir, really. I have a bit of a soapbox here at Consumer Reports about other things along this line, in that we spend a lot of time on new technologies, but we haven't quite gotten a handle on the basics. And, one of those I talk about all the time is we're talking about automated driving or partially automated driving, and we don't all put our seatbelts on yet, in terms of safety, et cetera. So we spend a lot of work. We're getting there now with rear belt minders and things that are incorporated in our rear seat safety, but this is one of them. We obviously do a lot of work rating headlights, looking at different headlight technologies. To his point, we have a warning that says, hey, your automatic emergency braking camera or radar is obscured. Don't expect that to work right now, but nothing tells us when we're a padiddle. Do you remember that? Padiddle was a game you played on the highway where you yelled padiddle when there was a car with one headlight out. And you got points for that. It was like Punch Bug, which was the Volkswagen version.
You had a padiddle Volkswagen.
Yes.
That was extra.
That was like bonus. But anyway, there is nothing, very rare, that Steve says, you got a headlight or a tail light out. I will counter that now with the fact that you don't see a lot of padiddles anymore.
Right.
That new headlight technologies, particularly HIDs, which we kind of jumped over, high intensity discharge, or now LEDs, light emitting diode headlights, they don't have a physical wire filament that breaks. That breaks with vibration, that breaks with a pothole, that just degrades over time. Life of the newer headlight technologies is way longer. So your chances of losing a headlight, and most taillights are now LEDs as well, is rare unless you've been in a fender bender or something like that. I do say, get to know your car. You know, there's some great checks if you're ever curious. Pull up to a garage or a wall. Make sure you got both of them. Particularly if you're perceiving that they're dimmer, back up to a wall. You can test your blinkers. You don't necessarily need to make it a two-person job, but it's also good to do that. You know, I think I told you my husband's spending a ton of time in Vermont now. They have a state inspection. You don't want to go a year knowing that you don't have a headlight before the cop pulls you over for it. But
it's always the case, right?
It's always the case that the cop pulls over and says, hey, you got a headlight or a tail light out. But yeah, pay attention. If someone flashes you, sometimes that's a good indication that something's off.
Right.
The other one too, same thing. People will go around with their daytime running lights on. They don't know that their headlights aren't fully on.
Right.
And they think they've got headlights and they don't. So Steve, I don't know what else to say other than I completely agree. Grab the basics of making sure we have some lighting before we're relying on cameras, though the cameras are helpful.
And what I had fun looking into this question also because Steve was kind of ahead of the game because back in the early days of the C3 Corvette, and C3 means the third generation Corvette, say around 1968, 1969, these cars had these analog taillight out indicators on the center console. There was also a warning light to let you know that your license plate light was out as well. So it's interesting that he was kind of, Steve is definitely on the cutting edge on this one. And talking to Master Tech Mike Crossan, who used to work at Mercedes dealers around the 2000 model year, Mercedes had warnings in the instrument panel to tell the driver when a front or rear light is out, and even told you which side. So some manufacturers are dealing with this, but to your point, Jen, it's getting rarer and rarer as time goes on.
It makes me wonder how many of the C3 taillights failed and why they felt the need to put that
Correct.
There's still an era though after that. Like why weren't they doing it? That's just, I think, relatively simple technology to do. So it was sort of on this point. Well, right.
Yeah.
But to your point, the bulbs are better now. They're not having the same issues. Ford F-150 does have a tail light on your trailer, a trailer light thing that tells you if you have a signal out on the trailer, which I think is genius.
Yes.
That's a really good thing. So,
And certainly any headlight question is great. We have what a bright idea that we have Jen here because she is one of our our headlight experts. Okay, moving on. We're going to hear from Joanna from Maryland, who says, what do you think about advocating for the return of head restraints, which move forward in a rear-end crash to provide better neck protection? Since COVID, it's all too common to see drivers tailgating and weaving in and out of traffic. In fact, my spouse and I were recently rear-ended by an SUV going 100 miles an hour. We did not suffer any neck injuries, and I think it might be because our car was equipped with these types of head restraints. So, Jen, I'm also going to ask you to weigh in on this and talk about restraints.
Yeah, first of all, Johanna, that's a serious rear impact. Like, I'm so glad you did not suffer any injury. Holy cow. But I was curious about Johanna's use of the word return, because there are many vehicles that have active head restraints. And these are a mechanical, for anybody who doesn't know, mechanical response. So as you're hit from the back now, so your body moves towards the crash, when your torso goes into the seat back, it drives the head restraint forward. And what that's doing is reducing the amount of what they call backset, which is the gap between your head and the head restraint. Because in whiplash injury, it's the back and then the corresponding forward motion that injures your neck and your vertebrae. So years ago, there was an update to the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard called 202A, which said they have to be taller and they have to be closer. To the point where some of our drivers here, particularly shorter drivers, found they were pushing their heads forward too much. Because they were kind of tucked under them. They were probably great for you, great for me, great for you. But that has reduced the back set, and the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety also rates them for back set in the front seat. So A good head restraint, Joanna, doesn't need to be active if that backset and height are adequate. Again, I'll go back to what Emily's doing on rear seat safety. There are still rear seat positions that don't have any head restraint at all.
Because it's not required.
Because it's not required, particularly in the center. Truthfully, front head restraints are really good and probably don't need to be active, though many are out there. Right. But we do need to do some work for the rear seat because there's a lot of people riding. You think of, again, we say Ubers and Lyfts and all that. We're in the rear seats much more often than we were. And adults are there too as families, bring a grandmother or, I used to get put in the back a lot with my kids. So anyway, good question. Rear impacts, not the most common, but are one of the most injury-causing, not fatality, but the most common injury-causing type of crash because of whiplash. So, great question.
So the next question, we're going to go international. This is Kevin from Nice, France, and it must be nice to be in France.
How do you say hello? Nice. Au revoir. Or is that goodbye?
Kevin asks his question. He says, I sent a question to Talking Cars about 5 years ago when I needed some guidance buying a new car, and with your help, purchased a 2015 Audi A3 convertible, which I still enjoy every day. But with driver assistance tech progressing, I'd like to upgrade to a newer car. I was thinking about a new A4 or a Mercedes, but both will not be available with airmatic suspension anymore. People tell me that an air suspension makes a big difference, especially on longer trips. Is no air suspension a deal breaker? What would be a smart choice for a 4-seater convertible? BMW is not an option. Too much testosterone.
Oh, boy.
Well, that's maybe the first time I've read a Talking Cars question that brought up testosterone. But anyway, so really the part of this answer is, do you have to have an air suspension to get a good ride? And certainly in Consumer Reports' experience of testing hundreds and thousands of cars, the answer is absolutely not. You do not have to have an air suspension. There are a lot of great setups with normal suspension components that provide an excellent ride. And I would also caution about the air suspension systems needing replacement. Can be very, very expensive. So I would say try a bunch of cars, Kevin. Try them on bumpy roads. Yeah. Even without the air suspension, you will likely find that, I guess, more modern cars. I mean, you're starting from a 2015 model. So now we're jump forward to 2023. A lot of cars provide excellent rides. And with that in mind, though, this is kind of one of my favorite parts of our podcast, is we're all going to give you a suggestion. We're going to take a pick for a 4-seat convertible. And Ryan, I'm going to start with you. What do you think Kevin should buy?
So
I know he struck down BMW, which just hurts your heart, but still,
it's okay. I forgive him. He had the A3, Audi A3. I'm assuming he liked it. He still says he still enjoys it every day.
Still likes it.
I would, if I was him, I would go with an A4 or even an A5 if he doesn't mind the back seat, and that's still fair. My parents actually had one and they loved it. I think it rides pretty well. I will say the A3 is a smaller car.
Yes.
And that class of cars, and very nice car, but those cars are a little firmer riding. If you jump up in size, you generally get a little bit better ride right off the bat. So
longer wheelbase.
Yeah, longer. So the longer wheelbase helps. I will say that Mercedes probably owns ride quality on this level, but sorry,
jumping ahead.
But I would argue A3 or A4 would be more fun to drive.
Right.
And he has a pretty fun car to drive already, the A3. So that's kind of where I would go.
And Jen, when we were talking about this question, you mentioned, a 4-passenger convertible is just inherently compromising. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So this is the assumption I made, Kevin, and I hope it's a good one, that when you asked for a 4-seater convertible, that you actually wanted to use that rear seat. And that's one of the compromises. There are very few 4-seater convertibles where that rear seat is actually functional, which is why my pick, I said, okay, ride, and a functional rear seat. I went with a Mercedes-Benz E-Class cabriolet. And I wrote in my notes, nobody has mastered ride like Mercedes. To get to his aromatic question, like, I think you'll be super happy with how an E-Class rides. I think you'll get a rear seat that's functional and big enough for someone to actually be good in, even an adult. You may not get, to Ryan's point, the sporty driving that you've certainly enjoyed in this A3. Yeah. Now, I will say, in our ratings of the A3, very high for road test. We love how it drives. Very high for owner satisfaction. Reliability is not its strong point. It might not be quite as reliable as the Audi. So, worth a drive for sure.
So just to touch on his air ride comment, people had told him that it's it can be air ride better. I think the perception of that is sometimes some very high end vehicles, large Mercedes S-classes, Range Rovers. A lot of them are equipped with these air ride suspensions, and yes, they ride very nicely, but they're also totally different animals in the class of convertibles that you're talking about. So, I'm not even sure. Some of those cars aren't even available with an air ride. Some of these, convertibles and stuff. So, I think, to your point, like you mentioned, get in some of these cars and drive them. Take them down some rough roads, and you might be pleasantly surprised.
And I think the only difference, it may not be that you're going to have an easy time finding an E-Class convertible either.
No.
So you may need to drive the E-Class. I think the only thing to be aware of is probably noise, but that's a nice power. I was watching some videos.
Sure. We do our research here.
It's a very expensive convertible, but it is out there.
It's a beautiful car, yeah.
So I'm going to hop on the Ryan bandwagon and go with the fun to drive answer. And I did sort of neglect to bring up in my thought process a really nice ride because I'm going with a Mini Cooper S convertible. All right. I'm going fun to drive. I'm going manual transmission because I'm a psychopath, but and I know they're going away. In fact, Mini Cooper just announced that this will be the last model year that they will be offering manual transmissions. So that's too bad. But with a few options, I priced out a Mini Cooper S about $40,000. Yes, the back seat is absolutely tiny. There's definitely compromises here. If you don't mind sort of the tighter confines of an A3, I figure you may give the Mini Cooper a try, and I've enjoyed driving just about every single Mini Cooper that we've ever tested.
The Mini is probably the most fun to drive out of any of those. I would
So Kevin, I'm glad you're a regular listener and watcher of the podcast, and we'd love for you to follow up and let us know what you finally chose, and hopefully we gave you something to work with. So next up. And our final question, we'll continue the baseball theme, batting cleanup, is Francesco. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. After watching your recent episode on the different powertrains for the Toyota Grand Highlander, I got curious about the way Toyota rates the power of their vehicles. From what I can tell, the Max powertrains have a hybrid battery of 1.44 kilowatt hour, which is not really that big. This battery and electric motor combo makes an additional 97 horsepower and 90 pound-feet of torque compared to the 4T engine. Imagining a scenario where a vehicle is loaded with people and bags going over a prolonged hill at high speed, what happens when the battery is depleted? I haven't seen any auto journalist addressing this boost rating on the Max powertrains yet. So interesting question, and again, furthering this theme of this podcast about new automotive technology. Jen, what kind of answer did you find in your research?
So certainly that scenario that Francesco talks about, the fully laden vehicle, high speed, long grade, is kind of a perfect storm for a battery. And probably very unlikely is what we heard. And Toyota is super cautious in terms of iterating and expecting what could go wrong, which is why their reliability is so good. I can't imagine that they didn't test really high battery load scenarios to counter this exact problem. We had similar questions. I don't know if you remember about the all-wheel drives that were driven only by the electric motor.
Right.
What happens when my electric motor's my battery's depleted, so I only have a two-wheel drive vehicle? I don't think we've realized even those scenarios. So the answer, Francesco, was I wouldn't worry about it. But even say that happens, if you look at those numbers, the Max engine with its 362 horsepower, even if its battery is depleted, it becomes the regular engine that we bought, the 265 horsepower, 2.4 liter Ford Turbo that we have in the test vehicle.
Right.
It's probably still a great powertrain,
Right.
even without the boost of that Max
It's still gonna carry you.
version of the hybrid.
The internal combustion engine is still more powerful than the electric.
Right. It's plenty adequate to get you up that hill, even without the boost.
In that situation, yes.
Right. So we'll kind of keep that answer short and sweet because we got to wrap up this awesome podcast with your questions. Really fabulous. As always, check the show notes for more information on the vehicles and topics that we discussed. And a reminder, keep your questions coming, talkingcars@icloud.com. And this episode was produced by, of course, super producer Dave Abrams and edited by Andrew I Still Play Hockey Belize and Anatoly the Great Shumsky. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week.